Welcome, everybody, to Potholes and Politics, local Maine issues from A to Z. With us are the co-hosts, glad to say Rebecca and Rebecca R squared, which does mean that this is actually my last episode. It's a bit bittersweet, as I've loved doing this over the last few months. But we've got a great episode in store, combination of funding sources and housing and local issues.
Neal, we're going to be really, really sad to lose you and your energy around here. But sounds like you're getting when the getting's good, because session's around the corner. It's going to start and it's going to be mayhem. And key to some of that mayhem is going to be housing, which is why I think it's really great that we have County Administrator Ryan Pelletier from Aroostook County and Town Manager Gary Picard from Madawaska and City Administrator Martin Puckett from Presque Isle here to talk to us about housing issues, particularly in the county, because we tend to think about a lot of housing issues really focused in Southern Maine. And I think we'll find that that's probably not exclusively the case. Then we get to introduce Becky Lambert to everyone, and we're really glad that she's going to be part of this as well. So welcome, Becky.
Thank you.
So thanks, Ryan. I would like to talk to you first because we haven't had a ton of county perspective so far yet on potholes and politics, but county government is an important level of government within the municipal context in that municipal assessments, of course, fund the majority of the operations, but that partnership is really key as well. And Aroostook's a unique community because you're also providing that local level of service delivery within a number of communities, 112, I think, of the unorganized territories. So you're a bit city administrator, county administrator, jack of all trades too. But that partnership piece is really important. I'm wondering if you could talk to me a little bit about how the county sees itself within the Aroostook context as a partner for municipal government.
I mean, I think we acknowledge here in Aroostook County that we can't do the work that we need to do without the collaboration with the local governments, the municipalities. We don't take a top-down approach when it comes to delivery of services here in the county. And I think that's been pretty historical. If you go back and look at different initiatives that have happened, Aroostook has usually taken a lead on regionalizing certain services where it made sense to do so. You can go back to the late 1990s when E911 was, transforming out across the state. Aroostook decided early on to bring the municipalities together and make a decision on how we would handle public safety answering from a regional perspective instead of having multiple PSAPs like you see in other parts of the state. The municipalities bought into that early on and said, yeah, that makes sense. And so we actually have one PSAP that covers all 911 calls for Aroostook County. And even more unique is that PSAP is the Penobscot County government. So we contract with Penobscot County to answer all the E911 calls that are made in Aroostook County. And then through the dispatch network, those calls are routed from Bangor to whatever the dispatch operation is that needs to receive that call here in the county, whether that's a local police department, the sheriff's office, or what have you. So very unique situation. That's been working for almost 30 years. When I took this position probably 6 years ago, I come from local government, obviously, so I have a close connection with the two gentlemen here on the screen as former colleagues of mine. And I made it clear from the get-go with the commissioners that I was not going to let go of those relationships. So the county continues to be a very active member of the Aroostook Municipal Association. And anytime that I have an idea, I go to them with it first to see if it's something they'll support. And I think that it's a two-way street. If they have an idea that makes sense to do on a regional basis, they come to me and we have a conversation before moving forward with it. So it's kind of a unique situation, I think, that we have here.
That's really key. You brought up two things I'd like to dive down into, and one maybe just to make a statement. How far is Bangor from where you are?
Driving time to like where I work is about 3 hours.
Just for some scale, for listeners who haven't been to Aroostook County, having Bangor involved in that. That's pretty
two and
big.
a half hours maybe to where I work. I live up in the St. John Valley, so that's another 45-minute drive for me to get from here to home. But one thing I tell people all the time is if we have a meeting in Augusta and we leave Augusta, we cross the county line within 2 hours. But most of us, after we cross that county line, have another 2 or 3 hour drive till we get home.
Yeah, that's pretty wild.
It's just the way it is.
So the other thing that you brought up is regionalization. And I think that's really important because I think a lot of that discussion around housing that we want to dive into really transcends a lot of municipal boundaries, county boundaries, and that partnership's really important. Martin, I'm wondering if you can talk to us a little bit about the homelessness situation that you're experiencing in Presque Isle.
It was one thing that really came to the forefront of discussions when we would see an influx of the population, especially in a certain area. We had one hotel where they were using it as for the housing substitute for the local homeless shelter, and really the homeless shelter was at overflow capacity. So there needed to be some other answers. So our local CAP agency was instrumental in setting up additional housing. And that presented a lot of issues of impacts that local area, impacts the downtown. And we had a lot of discussions with the hotel owner and with ACAP to try to find a permanent solution. But housing, we have been talking about housing now for about 3 years. It's been on our radar. And this homelessness issue just really highlighted the issues of not enough housing stock available for people, affordable market rate housing, all types of housing. We just did not have enough in Presque Isle.
Is there a common profile amongst the folks that you find themselves unhoused in Presque Isle?
No, it's all walks of lives. When we looked at the demographics, it was across a wide spectrum. So it was people, senior citizens that were without housing. There were families, there were single individuals, male, female families. It was really across the board. And also highlighted that there was unfortunately some apartment fires, house fires that happened in different parts of the county. And those individuals ended up being housed in Presque Isle. And when we looked at the breakdown of where people were coming from, the majority were from Presque Isle, but we were being a service hub. We were doing it from all over the county, small towns that just didn't have any resources. So the council felt like they did have a duty to, for Aroostook County residents, to have those resources available. But like I said before, there was an impact to resources. From a policing standpoint, we had issues that quickly increased our call volume, and a lot of those were mental health issues that we were dealing with. And we do have a hospital in our area, but due to the impacts of COVID, the staffing shortages, it really brought that to a forefront, how we were not prepared as a community to address all these issues on our own.
Yeah, that system piece seems to be really important too for supportive housing. And I understand there's a little bit of a program that's happening, maybe with the ACAP, for some supportive kind of navigators for the homelessness community. Is that?
Definitely. ACAP has really looked at what other type of services. So we have housing figured out. Now let's do the other aspects of this. So trying to find education, get these people back into the workforce. There's definitely a workforce shortage in the county. The mental health aspect, we have other community partners, the hospital, Aroostook Mental Health Services, AMHC, have been very helpful in this too. They actually were doing visits at the hotel where people were stayed. So rather than having the services off-site, they would actually go there and provide services to eliminate one of the major issues, which is that's transportation. We don't have any public transportation in Presque Isle. So that was a huge barrier for individuals. While the places these people were staying was not too far from the downtown. There's all those barriers for doctor's appointments, to even go to work. There are so many major issues for these individuals staying in our community. The county's a big place, and trying to get to housing is a major issue.
Yeah, Ryan, do you receive any calls about housing crises in the unorganized territories, or where you see your role as actually shunting it to where those services maybe are or exist in the county?
No, I don't. I can't say that we've gotten any calls. We do have general assistance in the unorganized territories, for basic needs, just like any municipality. But I don't recall ever getting a call or a need for housing. That's not to say it doesn't happen, because like Martin said, a lot of times what'll happen is folks, even in smaller communities that have organized towns, will gravitate to where there are services.
Yeah.
And so that typically ends up being in central Aroostook, Presque Isle, because if you're unhoused in a place like Presque Isle, during the day, you might be able to find some shelter at the mall or in a library or another place that's a public facility or something like that. So that's what ends up happening. And then that's how folks end up being congregated in one area versus another.
The workforce that you have that's supporting like the hospital and the university, Martin, and this is actually probably goes to Gary too, as far as workforce housing, are you seeing there being a problem with the staffing, even within your own municipalities, and the ability for a new staff member to find housing in your communities?
It's been a huge issue. So we have heard from some of the larger employers that people have ended up turning down jobs that were from out of state or from other parts of the state that they couldn't find housing, so they end up turning down the job. And I'm aware of another large employer that actually would rent houses in anticipation of getting an employee. And so they would, it's too bad. It was empty for like a month or two, but they would actually just rent out apartments as soon as they become available in anticipation that someone's going to need housing. So at least they had that as an incentive to get someone to come to the area.
Wow.
I'm aware of a community right now here in Aroostook County, a little west of Presque Isle, that's working with a group of local employers in the forest products industry to look at actually building as a collaborative workforce housing, which sounds foreign to me to sit here and think that in Aroostook County we're going to need to build housing for people in an industry, but it's really not that unique when you think back to the early days of the county and Maine. Large paper mills, like in Gary's area, actually built houses for their workers. And to this day, some of those houses are, now owned by individuals, but the land underneath it is still owned by the paper company. And that's not really a unique situation when you start thinking about what the need is now evolving to.
Gary, how about workforce housing in Madawaska?
Same issues. What we're seeing is, first of all, before this housing crisis, what preceded COVID, for us here in Madawaska was a very large construction project. Two, in fact. One is the new international U.S. Customs facility, the land port of entry, and the International Bridge project. Two separate contractors, very large projects, hundreds of millions, and not a lot of local workforce to be able to fill those jobs, right? Of course, these contractors and with federal dollars and stuff, they try to keep as much money local, and there was job fairs that happened to try to find some local workers. But I believe in large part, most of the workers, except for like subcontractors, the laborers of the various industries that are being supported there are people from away, from southern Maine, from like Reed and Reed, or Woolwich is up here. But there have been people from Texas that have come up here to work on the project because local the GCs, the general contractors on the job, just couldn't find available contractors who are interested in working, because there's so much work out there right now because of COVID, and just trying to find a contractor these days, or even skilled labor, is impossible. So for us, what preceded COVID was this huge project that sucked up a lot of available housing stock, apartments, and homes. Sometimes workers would combine and rent a home if there was one available, and others opted to just rent an apartment, something like that. So that took a number of units out of availability for us. Then COVID hit, and then there was the influx of people that moved up here, like everywhere else in Maine, pretty much sucked up every other available property, I think, apartments and then homes. I mean, we saw home values skyrocket here like we've never seen before, and a low inventory of available places to buy. So market drives the price, right? And I think what happened is everything went up. Prices of apartments went up. Availability is very low here. In preparation of this podcast, I talked to my GA administrator. I said, can you give me a sense for what you think if we had 5 people that showed up here next week for GA because of, from another town, for instance, could we find them housing? She's like, no. That's two issues, I guess, is that there is no housing available. All of the landlords have waiting lists, right? So supply and demand, you can see that helps to bolster prices for that stock. And then they get to vet their candidates, their tenants, right? And GA is not the highest paying program, the general assistance program for apartments. So if they can get prime price for their units without having to deal with general assistance, then obviously what they're going to do. The economics is going to point them in that direction. So for us, even if we had better GA maximums to be able to pay for these prices, we just don't have the housing for it. And then I think the other thing contributing to it a little bit, I don't know what extent, is the short-term rental industry as well. I think is contributing in some shape to the housing crisis here and in Maine as well.
Yeah, you're becoming a destination for a lot of cool stuff that's happening up there as well. Martin, I saw, I think earlier this year, there was a collaborative project that the city is doing to attract new immigrants to the area. Would you mind talking about that a little bit?
Oh, yeah, definitely. So again, going back to the workforce development, we know that there's this huge segment of the population that does exist, the 25 to 50-year-old segment that just is absent from our workforce. So we had many conversations about this. It was various groups were talking about getting people into the workforce. So there was an application from Northern Maine Community College to actually use some of their housing that's not being used by students. A lot of people that use the community college are commuters. And so they had these college dorms that were available. So the proposal is to bring individuals that need housing and also need workforce development, education, training, that they can do that right at the community college. The other major benefit is the community college is actually located in the middle of the Presque Isle City's industrial park. Tons of job opportunities that are available there, all within walking distance. So you remove the transportation element with the housing. Also, they have, it's like being a college student again, right? You have the meals and the training, and you have the capability to work right there in a centralized location. So the proposal is actually to hire a person that is kind of a community ambassador that ties the programs together, that breaks down the barriers to being part of the community. So we've got the green light. We just got last week, we did some additional paperwork to get this program. And this is not just for Northern Maine Community College. That's going to be the primary focus. We're hoping to blossom that to more people moving to the area too, that it's a resource for people that are new to Northern Maine and need help moving to the area.
That is really neat. I like that collaborative approach, which is unique too, because of where that particular building is situated within the community. I think that's also really key. Gary, are there any opportunities in Madawaska for something, I guess, similar or housing projects? Where would you see, I guess, maybe Madawaska's future of housing moving towards? If you have 2 major projects going on, do you think this housing affordability and access problem is acute? Do you think it'll go away once those projects are done? Or do you foresee there being a long-term consistent need in Madawaska for?
Well, I do think that the projects are set to start winding down. The construction projects starting by the end of 2023 and be fully complete by the end of 2024. Yeah, that's going to free up some space. My hunch is that it'll be quickly gobbled up because there's so much demand right now. I'm not sure how much relief that's going to provide for the long term, right? But yeah, workforce and workforce housing is an issue. It's kind of a chicken and egg thing. Right now, all of our employers here are scrambling, trying to find people to work. And there's just competition for labor is fierce, and housing is part of that, right? So, even if an employer could bring somebody up here, they got to be able to find a place to live. I'm not sure here in Madawaska, I don't have any stats on that to speak of, but I have to believe that's part of one's decision to move up here is to find affordable housing. So we have great jobs. We're becoming very competitive in terms of rates of pay compared to other places. For the longest time, Northern Maine experienced an exodus of our people that we raised because they were better opportunities elsewhere, more money, in Southern Maine and New England, Connecticut, Massachusetts, New Hampshire were places that for many years people went to because here in Madawaska with Twin Rivers Paper in their prime, in their heyday, were employing 1,200 people, we're down to a workforce of 550. But 30, 40 years ago, to get into the paper mill, you had to be on the top of your game and you had to have it inside to get in there. You got lucky. And if you got in and you could be considered a lifer there, you could spend the rest of your life working there. Today, that's different. People don't stay in their jobs as long anymore. And the mill it's just a revolving door, just trying to find people to fill a workforce that is aging. Right, and trying to get to a point here is that the workforce is aging, and a lot of our seniors are aging in place, right? So that housing stock is not necessarily becoming available yet. There's jobs that need to be backfilled when they do drop, the silver tsunami when these people do drop out of the workforce. So I happen to think that demand for housing is going to be higher and harder to find over the next decade because of that.
I have to jump in and just say that it seems like there's this common thread that workforce housing might almost be the linchpin to so many of these woes, and just trying to connect the dot that it's an impact to the unhoused and homeless population, sort of getting them situated and stable. It's an impact to having the availability to bring in sort of infrastructure crews and projects. It's impacting and affecting the retention of our current employees and sort of the moderate income families. And so that at every sort of level and threshold, that's what's holding things up. And so where do you begin when you have constraints with, well, it has to be located maybe close to services in one regard, or it needs to be affordable for different socioeconomic groups. And I guess where I'm befuddled is, where do you begin? And I know that's a question that all of you are wrestling with.
Yeah, I think it sounds like there's a lot of local ingenuity that's happening with those resources. But Ryan, you've probably got the 40,000 foot view on the Aroostook scale. Would like to kind of do two things. One, refocus on the homelessness piece and the project that you have underway with the ARPA funds in the county.
So it comes from this homelessness task force that Martin probably could speak to more about how that formed, but it basically involves city leaders from Presque Isle, and then service agencies like the CAP agency, like Homeless Services of Aroostook, other agencies that I'm not aware of, faith-based groups probably, coming together to deal with the issue specifically in Presque Isle. Keep in mind that Presque Isle is the location of the only homeless shelter we have in all of Aroostook County. So it became pretty clear as the rental assistance program was winding down, and these folks that Martin talked about earlier about being in hotels were going to be out on the street. The homeless shelter just didn't have the capacity to take all of them in. And there were some real challenges that the county as a whole was facing, trying to find a place to put these folks because of fire codes and other, building impediments. And so this group had been meeting for, several months, I think, trying to avoid this inevitable situation. And it just became real clear to me that the county was going to have to step in and do something. And so I started meeting with them and talking about, okay, what do we do? How do we do this? Does the state get involved? The state didn't really seem to have anywheres for us to go with the problem that we were facing. And so the idea came up that, well, we have these ARPA funds. What can we do with some of those to at least get us through this winter so we don't have people dying out in the streets, And that was really the focus of the whole initiative. And so to get anything done here, I have to convince 3 people, my board, to do it. And it goes back to the relationships with these local communities that we have. The way to do that is to convince my board that the communities that ultimately either fund the county taxes or would receive some of those ARPA funds through the program we had would support the use of those dollars to focus specifically on this one issue. And so reached out to the communities throughout the county, and we had broad support from town of Holton, city of Presque Isle, city of Caribou, town of Fort Kent, sending in letters of support saying, yeah, this is a countywide issue and we got to do something to address it as a region, not as an individual town or city. And then the other player, I guess, in all this is the Aroostook County Sheriff's Office, who covers the whole county, that in areas where there aren't organized police departments. What they were seeing was, where if these homeless people have the choice of freezing to death or committing a crime to end up in jail, where are they going to go, right? And so the sheriff's office got behind this effort too and said, I feel that this is important for the whole county to support that effort. So the folks at the ACAP developed a plan in partnership with Homeless Services of Aroostook to turn the main dining center of the Homeless Services of Aroostook building into a warming shelter that is open only in the evening. And so it's a default in case there is a need at night when temperatures are dropping and there's nowhere else for them to go. These folks can go into the homeless shelter under the warming center. I know your podcast is going to pick up my air quotes, but into the warming center area now of what is essentially their dining hall during the day. And that met code and that met the regulations and all of that. And so our ARPA money paid for some upfront construction needs, security cameras, that sort of thing at the facility. And then we have earmarked, I think it's like $190,000 is what the anticipated cost could be throughout the entire winter until spring. And they're tracking how many folks go in there, and we reimburse on a monthly basis from our ARPA funds.
Wow, that's pretty good. That's like an immediate response, which is what you get from local government in general. It's like, there's a problem, we got to solve it.
This problem was not going to get solved by any other level. It became real clear real quick that if the local government didn't come together and address this, that it wasn't going to get addressed.
You're in a unique situation too, in that you're maintaining some infrastructure for a lot of those communities throughout the winter. And the folks that are making some development decisions or development decisions in general in the unorganized territories aren't in Aroostook County, they're in Augusta, right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we end up in a situation where land use and code in the unorganized is completely under the Land Use Planning Commission. And as I've shared with you before, oftentimes we don't find out about a building project or a development in the unorganized until it's already happened. And the person who's built or developed comes to us and says, hey, how do I get these local government services now? And we may or may not be offering those local government services where they built or where they developed. It's a struggle to deal with that. And, it's different than a local town that at least has a planning board or a code officer contained within the same government structure as the municipal officers or the town manager. In the UT, it doesn't work that way.
Do you have any county programs for heating systems that like wood banks and those types of things for your?
Yeah, that's really interesting you asked that question, because that actually just came up yesterday. Aroostook County Action Program, I just learned this because it was asked, does have a wood bank program as part of their heating assistance program like LIHEAP. And they keep a list of people who heat with wood, just like people that heat with oil. And we have a company in Ashland called Main Flame that just reached out yesterday. Main Flame is a company that makes a composite log for fireplaces, but it does provide heat, and it's like a Duraflame. I don't like to use that term, but it's like the Duraflame equivalent that's manufactured right here in Aroostook County, and they wanted to make a donation of their material, their product, to the wood bank. And so ACAP has reached out and is now working with them to take their byproduct and keep it as a resource for folks that are in need of heating assistance that burn with wood.
That's really neat. But you've got some old housing stock too. Do you have folks in Madawaska or in Presque Isle that are facing some capacity issues or maybe fall under the home heating assistance programs would be necessary to help them with their windows or their doors, or the increased energy efficiency is actually too great so that they can't get any of that assistance? Is that something that you see in some of the housing stock in your communities?
Yeah, we do. I'll let Gary jump in too, but Presque Isle has some really old houses. Some of it was turn of the century. The house I used to live to was built in 1864. It was an old schoolhouse, and it was drafty, and all those houses surrounding in that neighborhood were the same age. And unfortunately, you do have the situation where a lot of seniors are living in houses that are just cost so much to heat. And the number one, we don't have natural gas. We don't have a pipeline up here, but most houses you do see have a stove pipe. And so the wood, it's nice to hear what Ryan said. That would be a huge help. A lot of people, that's an easy way to move firewood when it comes log by log in that situation. But we do have the local community action program, ACAP, does provide a lot of weatherization assistance and types of that need. But one of the things when we were talking with, we had a community forum with realtors, developers, looking at housing stock issue. And the number one thing they kept on telling us is that we have old housing stock that's incredibly expensive to heat and to maintain. And it's difficult for seniors to live in that type of situation, or anyone for that matter. No one wants to spend more than they need to on a heating fuel assistance. So going back to what Neal said earlier, what is the magic piece? I think it's a shotgun approach. We've been talking with a developer out of state that is proposing building new housing stock. I think it's around 24 units. The magic recipe that the realtor said that we need is 3-bedroom, 2-bath, around 1,500 square feet. That is the most desired type of housing right now. So that's what the developer's proposing to build, 24 of those style units. So we're hoping that 24 will free up additional along the line.
Yeah, so I'll jump in too. I think that compounding this whole issue too are a couple of things that's compounding the issue. So I do see a number of buildings, not a lot here in Madawaska, vacant apartments. They've been vacant for a long time. It would take a lot of money to bring those buildings back to code. What we're finding is that they're part of the COVID influx of people. Was not only people, but investors too, looking to buy investment property and apartments, vacant apartments. So we have some really, really old apartment buildings that people from away bought on sight unseen, and they're showing up here and they're realizing, well, okay, so now we got to bring this building up to code, right? It's not not really a grandfathered structure anymore, right? So, you've got to put all this money into it, and the economics isn't probably working out the way that they thought. There have been some success stories, but I mean, we have people from out west that have bought properties here. We have people from Europe that have bought investment properties here in Madawaska. It's amazing how much it's changed in so little time. Just to reflect back a little bit in such a short period of time, how much things have changed. I started my job here in Madawaska in 2017. Yes, in 2017, just 5 some odd years ago. And there was an oversaturation of apartment stock here. Landlords were cutting prices. They couldn't fill their buildings. They were advertising on Craigslist. People were showing up here in buses on move-in specials, $250 a month move-in special for 3 months, and then they jack up the rates on them later. So we had people showing up here, people on very low fixed incomes looking to switch their dollars. We're finding a way to get here, and they become stranded, sort of, if you will. And we've had when there's a lot of vacancy in apartments, landlords are a little more aggressive to come here and say, hey, you have an EGA, right? Come, an EGA interest, here we are, and we want to be a vendor. Put us on your list, and please send us anybody. We'll work with you. Not so much anymore, right? Because now And that's just 5.5 years. That's how much has changed. I think that there's a lot of things in play here that are causing this to happen. The cost of construction, cost of materials, and just the availability of contractors to do projects. Right? All of our contractors up here, I can't speak for all of them, but I think a common theme that we're hearing is they are booked out 2 years on work. And even if we could bring forth a project, it would be in the pipeline for quite a long time before somebody could get to it. It's a very complex, multifaceted issue. And it's going to take a lot of collaboration and ingenuity and some dollars and some incentives to try to make it happen.
I do think too, Rebecca, one of the things that we were talking about earlier is the type of housing. And we have, one thing that Ryan was talking about is how it's state controlled when it comes time for codes. And that seems to be the common theme when we talk to developers, when we want to build new housing stock. The problem has been doing multiple apartments or multiple units, multiple dwellings is a requirement. Some of the state requirements make it very difficult for the developers to make it affordable. So not only is it costly, but it's just not something that your average person could afford due to all the things that need to be done. So it's a struggle that we've been dealing with, especially when a contractor wants to develop new buildings, renovate old apartment buildings. I mean, Gary, I imagine you've seen that too in Madawaska. You have a lot of older apartment buildings that could probably be renovated, but they're not grandfathered, like you were saying. And that's something that, an hour south, it's still a problem with us too.
Another thing too that's happened here, Rebecca, that I think people sometimes forget about Aroostook having the same problem as other places, is the saturation of short-term rentals. COVID, Gary talks about those folks from away buying property sight unseen. Many of those, and many locals too, that had, inherited grandpa's house or whoever, have turned those into Airbnbs. We have a lot of lakes and rivers and natural scenic places here that draw snowmobilers and year-round folks for tourism purposes. And the short-term rental business in Aroostook County is the busiest I've ever seen it. And so that takes and you can't really blame someone. Why would someone want to rent a house for $1,000 a month when they can get $1,000 a week, and not have to deal with the long-term headaches that sometimes come with being a landlord? That's another factor here that's happened in the last few years. There are restaurants here in the county. I don't know when the last time was you came here, but there are restaurants here in the county that on any given night in the winter, there are going to be more snowmobiles in the parking lot than cars.
I don't even have enough, I think, to get one out of the garage at this point. But I can't ride my motorcycle. So it's a horrible situation to be in.
One last thing to add, I think, of one of those many factors that's causing all these hardships or these housing constraints or availability is even contractors, even if they had the means to move a project forward, they can't find people to work either. They're short staffed, and the strain on the workforce is immense. And there's so much work out there available right now. The opportunities are, I invite anybody to come up here. There's all kinds of work, great paying jobs in many different fields. So there's a lot of different problems, and it's chicken and egg, right? What are you gonna do? What came first, and what do you tackle first?
Really interesting situation. And you also have the cross-border aspect there. And I'm wondering, because, you'll pull students, Martin, you'll pull students across, and Gary, you have that shared mill there. Are your counterparts on the other side of the border, are they struggling with very similar things?
Well, I can share with you, I don't know about the housing, if they have housing issues like we do here. I do believe that they do have the workforce issues as well. And I've spoken to some counterparts, even before COVID hit, that there were starting to be some workforce strains in like the Grand Falls area. I had heard some Grand Falls of Brunswick. I had heard some stories that some manufacturers were bringing in migrants from Europe to come work in manufacturing, and something that we're looking at. So it's been coming, and I've got family in Quebec, not too far from Quebec City, and it's the same issues there. It's workforce, finding people to work is a big strain. It's a big concern, and so that's part of it. It's a big part of what it's all related, I think.
I'm going to channel Neal a little bit, because I don't know if you guys know, but Neal is now a proud summer camp owner in very western Southern Maine, right?
That's true. Housing's a lot easier when you're only trying to do it during the warmest months of the year.
You don't need insulation or
you just need a bug net.
Yes. So how are we going to attract the next generation of municipal employees and county employees in Aroostook County?
It's a great question. I think a lot of it has already begun. These gentlemen would probably protest that they are seeing new interest of people from maybe Southern Maine or Massachusetts. We are seeing that anecdotally because of COVID and remote work, that communities that were once sort of off the beaten path are having a resurgence. But, one of my beat topics while at MMA was ARPA and what we could do with federal funds. And, sort of while I was listening to everyone today, I was thinking, all right, federal funds are coming down the pipeline with the BBB and the infrastructure plan, and coming down the pipeline with the IRA and climate change initiatives. But where's housing's package? I mean, there's so many things related to it, and how is this going to get done? And
how are you going to build infrastructure without any employees and without any houses for the employees to stay in?
It is an issue. We hired the past two department heads that we hired were both from out of state, and one moved 3 months prior to the pandemic. And his experience was he was able to find an apartment he has a dog. And so there was no problem with him finding housing whatsoever. Something that was very specific for him, a single guy. And then we hired a public works director a few months ago. And the only housing that met his needs for a family was basically a bank foreclosed property. And he didn't have running water. He didn't have a stove. He didn't have heating capabilities. And he moved in October. And luckily we had a very warm October with no snow. But just hearing his struggles of trying to get a plumber, he decided he couldn't get a plumber. So he ended up doing the work himself. He installed the furnace himself. He couldn't get just basic things like a stove and a refrigerator locally. It was such a struggle. And luckily he was able to use his hands, but I'm thinking your average person, like I couldn't do all those things on my own. And so the struggle of trying to do that. So I'm wondering if municipalities are going to have to start providing these services and helping people with these basic things you think that every house would have. But I'm wondering if that's going to be an issue.
I can attest that Gary is an excellent carpenter. I've seen his work. So I think we just have to add that to his job duties. So
this will work.
Move to Madawaska, the town manager will build your house, no problem.
I'm liking that.
That is true. I don't think it's in my current contract though, so that was something we would have to work in on the renewal, right?
In all your spare free time.
Ryan, I feel a county agreement coming through. We could let's draft an agreement for Gary's services. We could draft that, right?
We could get that done tomorrow.
Okay. Thanks, Gary.
I feel like I'm been backed into a corner. I'm not quite sure what to make of it.
I think I'm hearing a use for the Build Back Better funds.
I will say that Ryan talked about, Ryan's familiar with Madawaska's story and, workforce housing in the early 1900s. The mill, Twin Rivers Paper, is going into its 100th year. That paper mill has been in existence. And Ryan is right. I mean, that industry grew up at a time to make paper, and there wasn't enough people to fill that workforce. And apparently back then, the economics of paper was such that workforce, building those workforce housing was part of their business plan, right? And they did it. And it's interesting. And the remnants of that today is houses that are owned. It's very interesting. As any assessor would come here who wasn't familiar with the mill town, would look at a tax card, and the way that the deeds for these properties exist today, those that remain, the land is owned by the mill, the house is owned by the person. The person has to pay the property taxes on the land too, but you wouldn't see it. You only know that in the deed. You don't really see that in the tax card. So, or you see it in the tax card, but just looking at the tax card, you would think that the person owned the land, but they don't. It's the mill. And there's not a lot of it left today. A lot of that workforce housing, ironically, because of the the new international border project and new bridge moved the port of entry upstream in a westerly direction on what was the Twin Rivers paper truck yard, if you will, where all the trailers get parked and loaded and shunted back and forth. And the government had bought that from the mill many years ago in anticipation of this project, and they were allowed to continue to park their trucks there until the project started a couple of years ago. Well, now, Twin Rivers Paper has been buying up some of those old workforce housing, the houses, they already own the land underneath them, just so they could tear them down to park trucks and trailers because they lost space where they were before. So it's just a strange thing altogether. But I don't know what the solution is, but
Ryan, you mentioned the forest products playing a role in that and building some houses. Do you know of any more projects in the county that are similar where the industry is taking a lead towards adding housing stock?
I'm not sure in the private sector. I do think in the healthcare sector and in the university, we have two campuses of the University of Maine system here in the county. And I'm not as familiar with the one in Presque Isle as I am with the one in Fort Kent, but both the hospital in Fort Kent and the university in Fort Kent have purchased private homes over the years and have made that part of their offering, if you will, to attract employees. We'll put you up in one of our houses for a period of time until you can find housing of your own, and they cycle people through until they can find their own place. That was pre-COVID. I don't know how successful that's been after COVID with all the housing stock that has been bought up. But like I said, quite a few of homes in the downtown area of Fort Kent and near the hospital are owned by either the hospital or the university.
Which by the way, caused an interesting discussion in Fort Kent. I don't work there, but I know that all of a sudden the hospital is a nonprofit, right, organization, and all of a sudden properties that pay taxes all of a sudden became owned by nonprofit, and those properties no longer started to pay taxes. So that was sort of a local discussion that was kind of going on over there. That was interesting to follow.
We need some assessors in there to wash that. Yeah, how far apart are you guys right now? Ryan, are you sitting in Presque Isle?
I'm in Caribou.
You're in Caribou. Martin, you're in Presque Isle.
Correct. Yep.
And Gary, you're in Madawaska. How far away is that from each other?
Gary and I would be about an hour apart. Martin and I would be about 15 minutes apart. Gary and Martin would be about an hour and 15 minutes apart. You got to remember, then we got Holton, which is 45 minutes south of Martin. So from one end of the county to the other takes you about 2 hours, 2.5 hours to drive from one end to the other.
I tell you, it's an issue for, like, my daughter does a lot of sports, and you travel throughout the county, and it's like, okay, you still have an hour and a half to go here, hour and a half there. A lot of the times it's half days for school, just the transportation element to play these games. And it's a commitment to actually drive to some of these areas. And a lot of people they underestimate that. Some people, think they're proud they made it all the way to Presque Isle, they made it all the way to Holton. I'm like, you still have an hour and a half to go.
I tagged Kevin Sutherland in a post I think Ryan had done when I was back on Facebook. I jumped off that, but I think someone was looking for a house, and I tagged Kevin, and I remember Ryan going, "That's like a freaking hour away." And I was like, "Oh, sorry, I didn't know where he was."
Yeah, Kevin owns a couple houses in Presque Isle, and I think that person was looking for a house like in Fort Kent or something.
Yeah,
that is true. We all know each other. That's a double-edged sword.
It is.
We all know each other, but they're so far apart geographically.
Neal, you want to jump in?
No, it's been a pleasure to yet again sort of hear some masterminds at work, but you're all dealing with many of the same issues, and clearly it's great to be sharing your story, but as well, and I wish you the best of luck. And
hey Neal, so I listened to the podcast, by the way, right? So, and I sought you guys out and I listened to the podcast. I'm gonna miss you. I gotta say, you got that radio voice, that personality that fits well. That we're gonna miss that. And I had the opportunity to work with you on LPC. And when you announced your departure, we were all a little disappointed, but we wish you the best in your next endeavor.
Thank you. Truly, I love the work at MMA. I loved who I worked with, who I worked on behalf of, and the only difference is that I think I joked that instead of working with the children at the legislature, I now work with children at a summer camp. And hopefully that radio voice comes in handy on the microphone. So
your children are so much more redeemable and adorable.
More tabula rasa there. They haven't been spoiled with all the woes in the world, but maybe some of them will be municipal employees. I'll start sowing the seeds when they're young. Only problem is that most of them come from away. So they'll make for great town managers in New York or Massachusetts.
Maybe they'll fall in love with Maine just like you did.
Yes. And we'll be able to steal them, even temporarily, for SFR.
Citizen education at its best.
That'd be nice.
Thank you, guys. I really, really appreciate it and appreciate you all being willing to do this. This is a really great conversation. I think it's going to be really timely and it's really important because I think it adds some significant perspective and some really innovative solutions and things I think for folks to be thinking about in other areas of the community. Sometimes maybe it's the saturation. It's harder for people to work together in smaller geographic areas than a lot of the innovative stuff you guys have got going on. So
just remember that if you move to Aroostook County, Gary Picard will be your carpenter.
And do I get the last word, or are we done on that?
No, you can.
How does that work?
No, you don't get a veto. If it's me moving to the county, you don't get a veto. Maybe you get a veto for other clients, but not for MMA staff, right?
Well, I'm going to leave it at that because I think it was fun. I don't want to rebuke that. I'd leave it right there.
See you guys.
Thanks.
Happy holidays.
Happy holidays.
Thanks for joining us one last time for one last Potholes and Politics podcast with you as a co-host. I have to say that it's been really fabulous. It's really easy from the get-go for you and I to have these conversations and to do this. You're equally as passionate and interrogating of a lot of the stuff that's going on. So I'm going to sorely miss you. I know everyone else is going to sorely miss you as well, but
I'll absolutely miss it. I mean, and the podcast has been great with you. But our job is made so much easier because when we work with our municipal officials, our members, they have such incredible stories to tell. And when thinking about Martin and Gary and Ryan today and their conversation, it reminded me of that municipal officials are jacks of all trades, that to fix or even approach an issue like housing, you're also going to be dealing with public safety, PSAPs, or mental health, and the implications to labor or schooling. And the pieces are so intertwined. The roles of local and county government, especially in Aroostook, are so intertwined. And, it was a very fascinating conversation. But as I mentioned earlier, I'm stepping away from the 10,000 foot level and thinking, where do you pull the public policy lever? How do you start to implement change slowly and in a long-term fashion?
yeah, there's some immediate needs that you can't really wait to build for. And
I don't think Gary is building everyone's houses. I
don't know.
He's a great carpenter, but
he's got some great ideas. Just don't let me pick the housing area because evidently even I don't know how far away one area of Aroostook is from another.
And it's probably should be said that the housing development that occurs in the next 20 years might influence a true demographic swing in the state, that whoever sort of gets out ahead and cracks the problem, finds a solution to being able to build affordable housing on a large scale. I mean, they could seriously attract a lot of people to the area of the state, and it could be Aroostook.
Yeah, and so much of that is dependent upon local resources. You have one homeless shelter in all of Aroostook County, then you're going to be the natural place where you're struggling with the highest rate of homelessness in that geographic area. And your resources are going to be tapped out in other areas to support that. So really that all-in response and that ability to regionalize and think about those problems on a bigger level is necessary, but also key, I think.
Absolutely key. But those resources are seemingly tapped out all over the place. And any effort at the municipal level is going to be robbing from one pocket at the moment. I know you and I could go on and on about ways in which the state may have had some missed opportunities to support these sorts of functions and services. But at the moment, municipalities are being asked to do a lot.
Yes. And I'm slightly jealous that you're going to have a much more chill spring than I will. But then maybe, just maybe, this summer won't be filled with No, never mind. It'll be filled with study commissions, and I won't have a summer either. But yours will be way more hectic.
In some ways, yes. But before we let this episode go, I feel like there's a big reveal. It's almost as if someone's been waiting in a cake and is about to pop out at any moment. But there's a slight passing of the torch today as I give over my snowball mic and hand it to Rebecca Lambert, the new podcast, Potholes and Politics co-host.
I'm not sure what kind of sound popping out of a cake makes, but I'm making that sound right now.
Squish. Yeah, we are moving from Neal and Rebecca to Rebecca Squared. We'll have to come.
Neal, you're leaving some very big shoes to fill, and I appreciate everything you've done for MMA. And I too, as our guests have said, will miss your radio voice and the way that you so eloquently talk about ARPA funding and all these boring topics that nobody would want to listen to, but you just captivate your audience. And it's been really nice working with you.
Well, it sounds like maybe now that I'm gone, someone might listen, but if I'm done droning on. No, but
Becky, one of the key things that will be happening with you onboarding is a little bit of a shift in the podcast as well. For the new session, as much as these types of conversations and deep dives are incredibly enjoyable, we're definitely going to be pivoting to what is immediately in front of us, and that's going to be the legislature, which we get to bring you to this session. So I'm super excited. You're going to be
forward to it.
I know you're going to be
first blood
advocates in the House. So I think what we're going to try to do rolling forward is every week during the legislative session, we publish the legislative bulletin, which is usually what has happened within our committees and our bills of municipal interests for that week. Oftentimes it's a call to municipal officials to come out and talk about their issues in context with the bills that are either being worked, they're either having a work session that following week, or they're being proposed and having a public hearing. So we're going to be, again, relying a lot on our municipal officials to be the ones to tell those stories. But then I think what we're going to do is use this podcast maybe on a weekly basis to talk about what's happening in the legislature. And that might be just going over what's in the legislative bulletin. So please do subscribe to our podcast so that you get those timely updates. We will do our quick hits, tell you what's happening at the State House, and hopefully put in some timely information on how to get your stories into the public record in the halls of Augusta.
It's a new experience, and I'm looking forward to working with all you wonderful people.
So stay tuned to Potholes and Politics with Rebecca Squared in the session, and be ready for some quick hits, some shorter episodes. Any of our listeners that would like to hear anything in particular about municipal government, please do reach out at mmapodcast@memun.org. Drop us a line, drop us a note, and let us know what you're thinking about. And don't forget to share us, like us, subscribe, and continue to listen.
Maybe it's fitting that I give the final salvo on my last episode, but this is Rebecca, and it was Neal. It was a pleasure signing off. Goodbye, everyone.
See you later. Bye.